without further ado, we're introducing a young woman I met just recently on a hunt in Oklahoma. Her name is Bri Coelho. Bri, welcome to Deer Talk Now.
Thank you for having me, Dan.
You know, we shared a camp together. We were there with the folks at Idea Ranch and Badlands, and it was such a cool hunt. But I had not had the pleasure of meeting Bree, and we sat there and talked the one night before dinner, and I was just so impressed with your background, not only in hunting but professionally. And so we came across Bree. She is I had to write this all down. She's a TV host, an author. She was a professional chef. She was a pastry chef, a former culinary school instructor. So many different things that you have done. And I wanted to bring you to the podcast and introduce you to our audience and get a little bit of what we were talking about. A California girl, right?
Yep, born and raised
Born and raised, I think, near Los Angeles. And somehow you
in
made your
Orange
way,
County.
Orange County, and somehow you made your way across the country to South Carolina, where you live now. And you are specializing
Yeah.
in wild game content and cooking. And so, how did that all come to be?
Well, all I can say is when I grew up, I never thought I was going to be doing this. I knew I wanted to be a chef, but never thought I would go the wild game route. And when I moved to the South for the first time, I actually moved from California to Georgia. And hunting, I went to a sporting goods store and it was filled with hunting stuff and like 5% of like recreational activities. And the moment I walked in there, I was just like, oh my God, like, why am I not hunting for my food? Because I'm very passionate about where my food comes from. And I bought a bow that day, and I had been in the South for a month. And 6 months later, I was out on opening day hunting my first deer. And then I got a doe on my first bow hunt. And then I took it home, butchered it, and then I thought, wow, well, what can I do with this? Because game was kind of new to me, obviously. And so took it home and you start Googling recipes and I'm like, wow, okay, yeah, I can grill a backstrap and make a popper. And so then I just decided to show all the elevated ways you can use wild game meat and how to cook with it. And then I started a blog, Wilderness to Table, because I just wanted to show that there's more to wild game than grilling the backstrap and poppers and stuff. And it took off, and now I've have two published wild game cookbooks in the show, and I mean it took on a life of its own, but all because I just wanted to source my own food.
Which is, I find fascinating. We were talking about this, like I said, at camp, and Bree shot one of the biggest bucks in camp, by the way. Congratulations. That was pretty cool. How did you, like, so you had talked, you have lived across the world, right?
Yes, I worked in France and Germany and lived in both of those.
France and Germany, where you were a chef, and you were doing that out in, much larger populations in California. Had you run across, I mean, was that a brand new thing for you? Had you run across cooking anything exotic in your time before you discovered hunting?
I mean, it was never exotic, meaning like I've worked in fine dining and Michelin starred restaurants, so it's more like truffles and foie gras and livers and pates and yes, there is venison. I've worked with venison, obviously, um, and some of the finest ingredients. So I was used to it, but when you have obviously in a restaurant though, no matter where it is, it has, even if it's venison, it has to come from a farm and a USDA inspected plant and everything. And so it is definitely not really the same. They're identical, but they're slightly different. I think the gaminess is not as prevalent as in farmed raised. Um, venison as opposed to self-harvested venison, only because of the ways they have to slaughter and the whole thing and their diet. So obviously they're getting grain fed more often than like they would out in the wild. So you just I've worked with it, but never to this extent now.
Yeah, and that is one thing I'm pretty sure. You can correct me if I'm wrong. I'm pretty sure most, if not all, what I would say domestic venison or stuff that you're buying in a store or in a restaurant is red deer that's farmed. Now, I do know there are some places, because whitetail is regulated because of wild game regulations and now with disease outlooks and things like that. I know New Zealand is a huge producer of red deer, and that's where we get a lot of our
Yes.
ideas for private land management with food and things like that. But what do you think if you are comparing? I think we actually discussed this when when you're talking about a domestic flavor versus a wild flavor. In your opinion, what is causing that difference?
Well, domestically, I have been to to a lot of for factory farms and seen the whole process. I haven't been to like a elk factory farm yet, but I'm going to assume that when they are killed, it's less stressful as say a hunt, kind of. They're different. So I always take notes and put notes on my packaging when I go to butcher my deer and like cryovac it and seal it up. I always put notes so now I know how to treat it in the pan in on so it'll taste better. So there are factors like if my deer ran 100 yards, well, now I'm going to have to counteract all of that lactic acid that it just built up and the adrenaline. So it had all this, like, internal anger going on, so to speak. And so I will mark that on that deer on everything that I process so that I know, okay, well, this deer ran 100 yards, so now I'm going to counteract it by marinating it probably a little bit longer, and I'm going to maybe not do a cut that I need. Like I want, if I want something really tender, probably going to break it down a little bit. Like cut it into smaller sizes, help it out, do a low and slow. It helps me to remember how to cook it in the pan, and I think that's where a lot of people get put off with wild game is if you can counteract those things. You just have to remember them. And so if your deer, if it was one and done and just dropped, it's going to taste different than the deer that ran 100 yards. And so a good thing to do is just like I do is put notes on my packaging whenever I'm sealing it up so that I remember. Because trust me, you will forget when you have 5 deers in your freezer. So I think a lot of people, hunters or anybody, can make that mistake and then give it to somebody who's never had wild game and like, hey, you want to taste deer, and they're extremely off put because it is more gamey than the beautiful New Zealand red stag that comes from there. So you just have to counteract it a little bit, and with a little love and TLC you can get it to taste equally as delicious. You just have to remember.
I think that's some pretty fascinating insights, and we have run articles not specifically on this, so I know who I'm going to this because I have a couple professors that write for us. But when you're talking about amino acids or lactic acid or even adrenaline or whatever is running through the deer, I think that probably can make a difference. Now, me personally, I think we had this conversation amongst people at camp was like, my palate's not that refined. I always said, if I took a backstrap from an Alberta buck or a Wisconsin buck or a Florida buck, I defy anyone to tell the difference. However, I know some people do have that ability. And the other thing that I would liken it to is this is probably a very, and I know you have experience, that's why I'm going to ask you this specific question. I have never had a good piece of bear meat in my life until this year. And I had been eating meat that people had given me from spring bears, And then this fall, I got some
Mhm.
meat from somebody from a fall bear. What would your insights be on something like that?
I mean, you are right. It's totally different. I would not recommend spring bear only because just think about it. They've been in hibernation for a couple of months. They are surviving off their own body fat. They don't have basically anything in their system. They're trying to fatten up. So they basically haven't eaten anything except themselves internally. And then you go to fall bear, who's harvesting on the berries and the persimmons and all the nuts. And I mean, no, bears don't eat really nuts, but all the fall foliage and harvest and the fish and everything like that, now that's in the bear's meat, and that is what's going to bring all the flavor. So spring bear, there's he ain't got nothing in there, so there's like no, absolutely no flavor. So I always think that fall bear will always taste better just because of their diet. So
And I think that's the same thing as far as what you're talking about with deer definitely applies to antelope. When we've gone antelope hunting in Wyoming, I've just been there a couple times to do it. When that animal is killed, immediately clean and cold. They want to make sure, number one, that they're not running that animal a long ways, because I think it is very
mhm,
distinct in antelope. You can taste it. They say it tastes like sagebrush. I think it is all that chemistry that's running through the animal. But if you put the animal down quickly,
exactly.
clean and cold to the butcher, and it's a good it's a good rule of thumb with anything. And then when we talk about domestically, when you say eating what you grow, whether it's vegetables or poultry or ducks or whatever, same kind of rules apply, don't they?
Right, exactly.
Deer Talk Now is brought to you by the all-new Edge 2 Pro from Moultrie Mobile. Never miss a moment with a 0.3-second trigger speed and a 100-foot detection range. Reduce false triggers, extend battery life, and fine-tune your captures with Moultrie Mobile's latest AI integrated technology. For more information, visit moultriemobile.com. We talked about how you got into it, but I have a couple questions that I want to go over. There's 5 of them, and I know these are going to be softballs for you. I kind of picked them out for that reason, but let's just go to it. So I'm going to there's 5 questions I'm going to give you, and I want you to now I did not give her these questions beforehand, so we are kind of ambushing Bri here with these. But we talk about seasonings and venison. What do you
Yeah.
believe? And if you want to break them down, please do that. What are the best seasonings that go with whitetail venison?
Seasonings. Well, my philosophy with venison, I'll tell you my food philosophy is what grows together goes together. So for like fall venison, like it's going to be highlighted by like cranberries and blackberries and persimmons and turnips and things like that. Like when you add those to your dish with venison, it's going to highlight the venison because that's what the deer has been eating. And so you're only going to just intensify all the flavors in the deer and make it even more delicious. So while that's not a seasoning, that's kind of how I like to enrich the dish. But with venison, warming spices go so well, and I think it's so underrated. So I will actually throw like I'll make a excuse me, I'll make like a little concoction, impromptu, and it's usually like a little bit of garlic, onion, salt, pepper, and then I throw cinnamon and cloves in there and a little bit of chili pepper just to give a little bit of heat. But those warming spices, you think, oh, it's going to be sweet. It's not. It just like gives this beautiful warmth to the venison, and you're not like, oh, it doesn't taste like a cinnamon roll. It just enhances. So cinnamon and cloves are my little secret
I've
sausage
never
there
heard of
for,
either one of
for
those.
seasoning my venison. Yes.
I've never associated either one of those. So now that's an interesting thing. And I like your comment about what grows together goes together, because that's something you never really think about. But as you described it, it's like, yeah, I've had dishes like that, and actually they were very good.
Mhm.
Okay.
So do it. My big thing is I always want to do the deer justice or the animal that I harvested because it's a life and I like appreciate it more than anything. And so that's my food philosophy on how can I make this taste the best, like when I'm going to eat it and serve it to my family. So that's kind of the rules that I live by.
That's pretty awesome. Okay, number two, how do you properly sear a venison steak on the grill?
On the grill, you so here's the tricky thing with venison is I don't sear my venison as high of a heat as I would like beef because there's not enough fat in it. So I actually go at a lower temperature for a little bit longer time than like say I would a steak. That's what I prefer because there is no fat to seep out and create that moisture within it. You can wrap it and stuff like that on the grill, but it's not the same because it really doesn't penetrate inside. Because when you're searing a steak that has fat marbled in it, you're melting the fat inside too, and the venison really just doesn't have that because it's so much more leaner. So I like to go on a lower temperature, probably like medium plus to high, and then let it sear and turn it over and cook those on that side because it's just there's no fat in it.
It's great. It's great information I never thought about. What about? And I said grill, and it seemed like you almost hesitated there. Would you actually cook a venison steak somewhere else, like on a blacktop or something like that?
For venison, honestly, my cast iron skillet is my bestest friend because it will produce an amazing sear and I can control the temperature a little bit more than I can, say, a grill. A grill I always use for like larger pieces. Love that, obviously. So that's when I'm going to go turn to the grill. But if it's like a steak, like a medallion or anything like that, it's definitely my cast iron skillet in the kitchen, medium heat, get the pan really hot. I like to use ghee because ghee won't burn. And then like if I'm really picky because then sometimes oils get too hot and they alter how your meat tastes. So I think that ghee is just phenomenal. And I use that in a cast iron skillet with a rosemary and garlic clove to sear my steak. And then and then when I finish it off, I finish it with butter in the pan and then baste it for about a minute. And it's quick and easy and delicious.
Ian, are you as hungry as I am right now?
Actively taking notes.
Yeah, I know. This is fascinating information. And then with that, I'm not going to ask you to explain it here, Bree. She does have a video, and we're going to put the link on it on actually how to. I think I knew this, but I forgot how to care for your cast iron. Bree has some videos on her pages that you can find this. It's stuff where you look at it and it's like, dang, I wish I would have been thinking about this before. Okay, number three. I know this, but I don't know it. What is brazing, and when would you use it on venison?
Braising is the technique when you take a hot oil or, for instance, melted butter, and you're constantly adding a fat to it or over it, and so you're letting it cook, and then you're adding more fat on top. You're letting it cook, and you're adding more fat on top. So one, the fat is going to penetrate, but it's also going to create a beautiful crust. So that's what braising is in a nutshell. And did you say when would we use that?
When would you use it with venison?
Um, I have used back straps, tenderloins, steaks, things like that. I think braising is very good. If you're going to do a roast, a non-bone-in roast, it's beautiful. Put it in the oven and then take on like a drip pan and then braise every like 10 minutes, depending on how big of a piece it is. Maybe like 5 to 10 minutes, and just baste it with that liquid again. Um, yeah, that's when I would
Have you ever
go
done
for it.
shanks, like the front legs, the meat with the
Yes.
bone in it? Is that something you would use for braising as well?
No, I actually for shanks like that because the meat is so tough and there's so many little tendons in there, I prefer to I love my pressure cooker. So I will put it in the pressure cooker, but then I can finish it off with a high heat braise in the oven, like get that temperature up to 500. or 450 if you can, and then braise it with like I would do like a seasoned heavy broth that's probably been reduced a little bit, and now you're adding back that fat and moisture with like butter and the broth and everything like that. But I wouldn't solely rely on my braising for cooking the whole shank, because obviously you want to get it super tender. And honestly, the freaking pressure cooker is phenomenal at that.
It's the way to do it. Like she says, low and slow, and that's something that you need
Yeah.
to do with those tougher meats. Okay, we've got two more for you here. Um, this is probably this. Knowing your extensive knowledge on this, you could probably take this many different ways. What are the key ingredients to a good venison marinade? And that probably depends. So you're gonna probably have to preface this.
Um, let's see. I have a go-to marinade. I believe, yeah, it's in my first cookbook, the Complete Wild Game one, and it is based off of it. There's bay, lemon, olive oil, um, and lemon zest and salt, and that's basically my most basic one. I stay away from marinades or brines that are too salty. Um, that's why I am just, people will probably hate me for saying this. I'm not a fan of like um dry rubs and then letting on venison and then like letting it set in the refrigerator, um because I feel salt is going to absorb moisture. And so to me, dry rubs, which are usually heavily in salt, they take out all the beautiful moisture in the venison and it gets drier. So I don't want to do that. So I will add salt with liquids like water, broth, oils, and stuff like that, but not as like the largest ingredient in my marinade or brine, because I want the salt to draw out some of the moisture and then from the venison, and then I want it to impart the flavored moisture from the broth for the marinade and everything like that back into the venison, whereas I think brines just absorb it out, if that makes sense.
Totally.
But my usually go-to is lemon juice, because you still want some of that citric acid to like help break down the muscle fibers to make it more tender. Lemon zest, bay leaves, peppercorns, kosher salt, olive oil, and usually I like to do chicken broth. So I will never, here's like a little chef's tip, is if you ever want to make everything taste good, if there's anything that requires water, why not use a broth or like a bouillon to season it? Beef, chicken, whatever it is. I think imparting water into anything is always a chance to add more flavor. And so I feel like if you just like rice, if you're going to cook like a pot of rice, well, why not use chicken broth instead of just plain water? Because now you're just going to get a more flavorful rice. So I always see as like my brines and marinades is to season my water that I use as well, and that really helps to just I want that flavor anywhere I can get it.
That's excellent information. Is there a magical time, minimum time to keep a piece of venison in a marinade, or can you keep it in there too long, or does it matter?
If you have an acid in there, it's definitely, you can definitely overdo it, because obviously it'll start kind of cooking it and it gets gray and stuff. So I usually will do it at least 24 hours, not cut steaks though. Like if that's just like the little tenderloin or something, 24 hours, and then the bigger ones about 48. And that's usually all I really do on my marinades and brines. Like obviously dry aging is a whole other thing. Like that definitely goes longer. But I really don't like to do it too much, because if you're like, oops, I accidentally put too much salt in it, you can just freaking ruin it if it was 48 hours. But if you pulled it at 16, it was beautiful. You know what I mean?
Sure. Excellent information. Okay, last question on these is there a right and wrong way to cut a venison steak or roast? And I suppose you could take that from both angles, when you're taking it off the deer and also when after you have it prepared.
When I'm taking it off the deer, I leave it whole as much as I can. And then I decide what I want to do when I get home. Um, because I want them to age whole first. Um, and then I break it down. I don't know if there's a right or wrong way, per se. But yeah, I can't say, yeah, this is, I think I do it just pretty basically. I just keep them whole in whole pieces and then break them down later, um, to do however I want them. That's a good question, though. I don't know if there's a right or wrong
Are
way.
you keeping them whole just because of air exposure, or is there another reason? Like when you're taking them off a deer.
I try to keep as many pieces whole because sometimes I don't know exactly how what I want to do, but I do want to keep that back strap all together. Like I don't want to break it down into pieces. Only because what if I wanted to make a really big, beautiful Wellington, and then I just kind of screwed myself in the field if I broke it down. So obviously, if you're packing out, sometimes you have to break them down further, which is then you just deal with it. But I just tend to leave them in their hole and age that way. So like I will also like if I have a roast and like I leave it, I did not break it down. What I like to do then is put it in the refrigerator to technically dry age because I want it to form. Um, because generally roast, I'm probably going to put like on the grill and or the smoker and something like that because I think it's delicious for that low and slow and the flavor with the smoke and everything. And so, excuse me, I want it to form a pellicle in the refrigerator. So I want it to form that skin because when I put that whole roast back into the smoker now, that pellicle is going to absorb all of the goodness, smokiness. Whereas to if I just took it out of the bag and put it into the smoker, so I'll let that whole piece uncovered, on a sheet tray with a rack, so any drippings can go down for about 24 to 48 hours depending on the size so that I can get that pellicle and that smoke just sticks on there.
That's some great information. One thing that I thought, and I'm looking at it from a different perspective. Mine was like taking meat off of the deer. I always thought by taking it into smaller pieces and then freezing it, I was losing flavor or losing quality. If I cut like you said, you have a nice big back strap, and if you butterfly those, different story. If you're packing them together, but if you're packing them individually, I think it loses. I don't know. I think it loses its, if it's the texture or if it's the flavor, if it's frozen separately. And I always thought that was a uh, air exposure thing. And that was the same thing with hams on a deer. We would never skin those down and expose that meat until it was time to process the deer. We always left that hide on. And I think it was a moisture situation. But I don't
And
know
you're
if.
very right. The more air exposure it's going to get, like it's just going to make it drier and all the flavor is going to seep out. So, yeah, leaving it whole is the best way in my opinion to when you're in the field as best as you can. And then I will never seal though, like steaks. So it's like if I break down my back strap, like when I get home and I break down my back strap, um, I will take a larger piece if it's for like a Wellington or something. And then when I break it down into steaks, I will vacuum seal the steaks. But usually I will always put a little bit of olive oil, like 2 garlic cloves and a sprig of rosemary in with the venison, just to, again, I feel it's like another a lost way to add a little bit more flavor. And the olive oil is fat, so you just like seal it up in there, and it's phenomenal. And so like you can eat it right out of the bag and just put it in the plate, or you have something. Now your steaks are slightly flavored, so you're ready to go.
Are you taking notes on this, Ian?
Of course. Oh my gosh.
I know Ian is our resident foodie, and I can see him feverishly working over there. What about venison fat? Because you talk about that. Do you use venison fat in your cooking?
I really do not use venison fat. I don't think it has a very good flavor, even when it's like rendered down. I do think it's too gamey for me. I just don't prefer it. So I will use a lot of beef tallow when I cook with it, though.
That's something that I've
Anything
heard
beef
heard a
tallow
lot.
or duck fat. Oh, duck
That's the
fat
best.
and venison.
That is the
Phenomenal.
best. Duck fat is
Yeah.
the best, and I can say that by.
Mm-hmm.
And Bri actually, she raises her own chickens and everything too, and your own vegetables, which I think is pretty cool. Well, we could probably have another whole podcast on that. Unfortunately, I'm clicking that time off there. That's it for today. Bri, where can people go to find out more of? You can tell she's an educator, so where can people find out more information about you and your shows and some more of your products that you're working on?
Everything you can be found at bricoelho.com, my website that will link you to social media and everything like that. I'm very active on Instagram at bri.coelho, and that's primarily where I am at majority of the time. So if they have questions or anything, I'm always there to help answer or
And
anything
is
like
there
that on
one
Instagram.
platform specifically where most of your videos can be seen?
YouTube, which are also on my site, so you can get everything from my website, and it'll direct you to all the places.
Okay, she has a link there. She's Bri Coelho, Chef Bri Coelho. Bri, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me, Dan.
Absolutely. We'll do it again. And for Bri, I am Dan. He is Ian behind the scenes. If you want to check out all of our podcasts, wherever you're listening to this podcast, you can download them there. You can watch the video versions. Just go to YouTube. They're mostly there. There is I should say they're all there. And you're going to see some that you probably don't want to see from 13 years ago. It's Deer Talk Now. So just check out the playlist there and you can watch them there. For Bri Coelho and Ian Sanchez, I am Dan Schmidt. Thank you for joining us. Join us next Thursday for another brand new episode of Deer Talk Now.